This session is brought to you by Follett Learning. Follett's vision is to improve the world by inspiring learning and shaping education. Follett is committed to the future of school libraries. As the largest provider of educational materials and technology solutions to school libraries, classrooms, learning centers, and school districts, Follett is ready to help school librarians answer any COVID-era challenge. Find out more at follettlearning.com. Hi folks, I'm John Chrastka, Executive Director and founder of EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute. We're here for the conference session for the Library Advocacy and Funding Conference with Liz Davis, President of the Washington Teachers Union. I want to introduce her formally, if I could, because she's a fantastic collaborator and advocate for school libraries. Was a fantastic collaborator, coalition leader, networker, connector, thinker on the issues around organizing and political action. Elizabeth A. Davis is president of the Washington Teachers Union and has taught in DC public schools for 44 years as a highly effective, award-winning educator. Liz has been at the forefront of public education, advocacy, and reform, leading the transformation of WTU into a social justice, solution-driven organization that is dedicated to advancing and promoting quality education for all children, regardless of zip code. I'm going to come back and finish this rest of this bio in just a second. But that's the whole reason, Liz, that I wanted to have this chat today with you for our conference. The idea of transforming an organization into the social justice agenda, to the solution-driven alignments that are necessary, because it means that you've looked at what the problems are. Washington Teachers Union believes that it is critically important to improve teaching and learning conditions and aggressively amplify the voice of teachers in the dialogue around issues of teaching and learning. Liz, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me to this important discussion.
Oh, you're very sweet. Thank you. The Washington Teachers Union advocates in a number of different ways for funding and education policies. You're looking to ensure that all students, according to what WTU talks about itself, is regardless of race, ethnicity, immigration status, zip code, or luck in a school lottery. I got to tell you, we work with a lot of, well, we work not with as many school library, school association, school unions, forgive me, as I'd like to around the country. There are times where they're not necessarily showing up to the fight, you know? Mm-hmm. And I'm not suggesting that I want to throw any of your colleagues in the union community under the bus anywhere in the country, but why is WTU so particularly aligned under your leadership with student outcomes and not just protecting the contract?
Well, John, I just want you to know, to be transparent, when I won the election in 2014, it was not the first time I ran for president of the WTU. Mm-hmm. It was actually the third time.
Oh, really?
And yes, and I wondered what was it, and of course this third time I was not as enthusiastic about winning. I actually was ready to fold up my tent and retire. Okay. And but one of the issues, my platform was very short. Basically, it promised teachers that I was going to transform the union into one that would address issues beyond bread and butter issues, which is traditionally what unions have done. Mm-hmm. And I knew that our members were not happy about the fact that we were not as well regarded in the district as they wanted us to be, that we were not as respected by legislators. And they wanted me to change that. They wanted me to change the narrative out there about teachers, about teaching and learning. And they also wanted me to get teachers to the table around decision making. And when I issued my platform as a social justice to transform our union into a social justice union, one that would come to the table with solutions rather than just problems, one that was going to amplify the voice of teachers and build respect. Because we knew that our union was at a crossroad, much like all unions, where if we don't transform ourselves mm-hmm. into organizations that address issues beyond just our salaries and our working conditions, that we're dead in the water, so to speak. I mean, so our team were excited about the fact that I wanted to transform our union into one that was going to be respected and basically lead the way in whatever school transformation was going to happen in our city. So, and of course, one of the issues that they really wanted me to focus on, which is what I had on my platform, was the growing achievement gap. Now, I was surprised to see how many of our members were concerned about that. I refer to it as the opportunity gap because what I do know as a teacher in DC for over 40 years, teaching in 9 schools, and those schools were not selected by me in every case. In most cases, 7 exactly, was selected by the superintendent. And it had nothing to do with my ability to teach, because I maintained my record as a highly effective teacher under 3 different evaluation systems. And I had to be, because as an activist, I knew that I was also a target. I showed up at every council hearing, every state board hearing. I took students, I took parents, because one thing I learned right away, John, was a teacher like myself, who basically treated my classroom as if it was a laboratory for social justice. I wanted to teach my students to think critically about what they learned, how to apply it to what they needed to problem solving. So naturally, I taught them how to write letters of complaint to their council members, to the mayor, to their state board members. I taught them how to write testimonies for hearings. So a teacher such as that is not well thought of in any school district. You sometimes are considered as a troublemaker. But I was proud of the fact that my students began to realize that they had control over a lot of the conditions in their school life and in their community. So I really love that part of teaching, but it caused me to be transferred a lot. And in each school I was transferred to, I saw another opportunity to do the same, but do it better. And overall, our union, after I won the election, began to not only focus on that, we focused on the current issues that were looming in our school district. More recently, it is one around adequate funding. And of course, the fact that when I called on you to come into DC, and I thank you for that, I basically knew that the union had to take the lead on addressing the inequities that existed in our city, ward by ward. When our budgets were appropriated by the city, those schools in the lowest performing communities, the poorest communities, basically received the least amount of funds. When the chancellor designated our school librarians as non-essential, I knew that those schools were going to begin immediately to cut those positions. In one ward, Ward 8, one of the poorest wards in the city, of the 24 librarians cut from school budgets this school year, John, 23 of them were in Ward 7 and 8, the poorest communities. And I cannot imagine why any school district, which has begun to make progress in reading as a result of our school library. This was something cited by our chancellor in 2007, Kaya Henderson. So overall, the support from library media specialists is a critical element to the work that we do. And one thing we do know as a union and as a union leader, the way we engage members who have not been engaged before is to rally around the issues that are critical to them. When school librarians reported that they were losing positions, we immediately we drafted a petition in collaboration with you, contacted all of the parent organizations that we had partnered with, and basically let them know we believe that every child in every school in our city deserves to have a full-time library media specialist, and they all agreed. And once they agreed and signed that petition, we continued to circulate it amongst other unions, because I wanted our members to know it is also important for us to not stand alone in addressing issues around education. As a member of the Labor Council in DC, I make it very clear that education will be on the table for every discussion, because every union in the Central Labor Council have members who have school-age children who care about education. So we basically build powerful allies with parents, community groups, faith leaders, and also labor leaders in order to push our demand.
Liz, I don't think it can happen without the frame that you first described to me when we first met about education being a civil right. That it's not just it's not just in a state constitution, it's not just in a city charter. The right is a fundamental one, and there's a social justice issue at play for a student, whether the student's a high achiever or low achiever, mainstream class and a special population. The civil rights issues here. Yeah. And then you just said something that I want to touch on, or I want to hear you touch on a little bit more. You went from you said achievement gap is not what you want to call it; it's an opportunity gap.
Yes.
And I see that that's part of a whole cloth approach. But can you go into that just a little bit more for me? Because there's a big difference in the frame around the advocacy work that you're doing and the coalition that you're trying to build. If it's not about achievement, that's a scarcity. If it's about opportunity, there's some abundance there.
Absolutely. And helping our members, because every campaign and every initiative that we launch, John, it's really also about educating our members, to change the narrative. because, and I didn't like academic achievement gap because it goes to the issue of capacity, whether a student has the capacity to learn. And I wanted them to know that I've taught in 7 of the schools in the DC that serve the poorest students. And they all rose to the occasion because my expectation level was that they would be able to do so. And what I learned in those schools, and one of those schools, incidentally, John, was one of the corresponding cases in the Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision, Sousa Middle School, which was the subject of Bowling v. Sharp.
Yeah.
When I learned that that was one of the schools, I just went all gaga.
You taught at that school?
I taught at that school for 7 years, but I was there for 3 years and did not know until the 50th anniversary of Brown, when the Post ran an article saying Sousa is one of the subjects of Brown. Of course, when I shared that with my 6th graders, they thought, Miss Davis, you seem so excited. We don't want to burst your bubble, but we don't really care about back there when you were a slave.
Right.
And I thought, I had to laugh because I thought, that is basically another reason why we need to teach history. However, I didn't want those students to learn about that case for the purpose of remembering dates and regurgitating information. I wanted them to learn about the Bowling and Brown case to make the case as to why Sousa was still under-resourced and no better off than it was 50 years ago. That it was basically one of those deplorable schools that Black students were relegated to in 53 when Sousa was built strictly for white kids. They got it. They ended up on Capitol Hill, John. Now, the proudest moment in teaching that lesson was watching how students, and this is the one issue that required one student in that entire group of 24 students to be selected by Elijah Cummings to be the spokesperson for those students at the Senate's commemoration of Brown. And I'll never forget that little girl. She's 6th grader. She went to the library at Sousa, which had been closed for 3 years. And she said, Miss Davis, she was newly transferred to the school. She said, why is the library locked? I said, because we have no school librarian. She said, well, that's ridiculous. I said, well, write a letter to the principal. That's going to be your writing assignment. They had to do real world writing.
Okay.
And she wrote the letter. We basically did the revisions, the edits, and she put it in the principal's mailbox. You know what he did immediately? He unlocked the library and told her she can go in at any time during her lunch break to, get whatever book she needed. She did. And you know what she came back with? On the Hill at the Capitol on that day, she reported that when she went into the library, she found that the same books were there from 1953 when white kids attended Sousa. And this was in 2005, John.
Liz, I got to tell you, I'm impressed by how you identify the school librarians as part of the solution, and how to address an opportunity gap by giving more opportunity by having school librarians in the mix. But it's not it's not possible without the funding formula, because you can't update a collection in that school library unless you got the funding. You can't staff it with highly trained and qualified.
Exactly.
You can't do PD. I mean, the funding conversation is almost like, it's like if we were architects here. The form follows function.
Yes.
You need the form of the budget to allow you to function properly. I mean, how do you bring that truth to your city council? How do you bring that truth to your funding partners?
Well, number one, we don't have to make the case for that to our parents and the community at large. We have to make the case for that to our council members and our mayor. That has been a push. And even though we've made some progress, not enough. In 2013, an adequacy study was done here in the district. Basically, it showed that DC public schools, that the city has not kept up with the funding for the schools, the cost of living since over 2 decades. And they calculated how much it would cost the city to catch up and to fund the schools appropriately. They still have not done that. But each year, we launch a Fund Our Schools, Fund Our Future campaign every year, because the budget each year is inadequate. There may be a few hikes in the amount, but it's still, we're lagging behind because we've never managed to keep up with the cost of living. And I don't think it's fair for a city, especially when you have legislators who always run with education as being their #1 priority, for us to allow them to get away with using that to win an election and walking away from the notion afterwards. So basically, we keep it front row center. We let our parents know. Every child in DC public schools, in order for them to have the adequate resources, textbooks, teachers, librarians, wraparound support, service providers. This is the amount of money the city will need to do. And we basically get parents to begin to focus, get us all on one page, and then we all go to the council. We make it a point to have teachers recruit their parents. We develop sessions to help them write their testimonies. What are the issues for you at your child's school? We help them develop their testimony. They only get 3 minutes. And we basically want to flood those hearings. Every month, we flood that hearing room with standing room only so that those council members, and two things happen, John. The council members don't suddenly see a few teachers who are just complaining because they want better textbooks, which is what we should do. Mm-hmm. They see parents backing us up, and they mm-hmm. also see votes. Mm-hmm. And that's what matters.
That's right. I mean, politics.
Yes.
Yeah, politics is people or money. You know, it's people or money. And yes, the union is a dues-paying organization, but you're one local. You know, it's not like you guys are showing up with a ton of. You're showing up with a lot of humans who care. And identifying the Venn diagram, the overlap, the intersectionality of why they care, it's leadership, Liz. I mean, I'm looking at what you're doing to build a politically active organization in a sustained campaign way, and I have to say I admire that. You know, the technique of bringing out the voters, which then in turn brings out the vote eventually. I mean, this campaign that we helped support WTU with in order to hold the line for Washington, D.C. school librarians has produced some good results. And yet, you know as well as I do that the fight isn't over, and it's not going to be over anytime soon. But I look at how you've addressed the school librarian crisis potentially. If you lost those folks who are doing information literacy and skills building as part of the whole cloth for every student, and I got to say I admire that. What was that? Can I just ask a personal question? I mean, did that come from your own experience, or did that come from you understanding as an educator where that fits? Like, because I don't see it around the country a lot.
I know, and John, I think a little has to do with leadership, because I don't believe that teachers who may not be doing, or librarians who are not launching such campaigns don't care as much. I believe it's helping them to connect the dots to who really controls your work experience.
Okay, talk to me about that. That's exactly right. Go ahead.
And of course, when we began to show teachers that what you are hammering on, what you want me to focus my attention on with the council members is a symptom of a problem. The problem is that your school lacks the resources. And I want you to see yourself as a part of the solution. Mm-hmm. And I said, you really have, when you really think about it, we are one profession in this city that has more authority to change elected positions than any other organization, because we have access to 65,000 voters, parents. Mm-hmm. Are we utilizing that? And if we're not, why aren't we? So we test drove that with the State Board of Ed race. Focused the teachers all on each ward that was running a state board. We had 3 teachers running. And our constant narrative out to them was, we have 3 teachers running for these positions. Wouldn't you rather have teachers who understand what you're dealing with in those positions? They're going to make decisions about your profession. Guess what? We elected 4.
Is that right?
4. And listen, and we had to blow it up, John, because it's important for teachers, it's like students, to know from your work, this is what happened. That you do have the capacity to change things. Mm-hmm. You don't have to rely on, you can force it. And you know, there are various ways, strategic ways for you to make those changes. And one is, if the elected officials that represent our wards in our city and our schools are not doing the things that really support what we do, then let's change them. The same way they would change you if you were not doing a satisfactory job as a teacher.
You know, I think that is a pure understanding, a pure understanding of how power flows. That is the most central power thesis around education that I've ever heard. You boiled it all down to sugar, Liz. If you don't like as a union member, excuse me, or a professional, if you don't like how it's going, work on changing.
There it is.
Absolutely. That's really extraordinary.
You said the magic word, John. Power.
Power, yes.
Yeah, it's about claiming the room. Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely do. So let me talk to you a little bit more about that, because part of power in a political environment is the legitimacy of your issue. You know, the legitimacy of your stance, the legitimacy of the community you're trying to support, their needs, I should say. One of the leadership challenges, though, is always listening, because the agenda sometimes morphs, changes under your feet, How do you, as a leader of, and forgive me, I don't have the stats in front of me. How big is the union again?
5,000 members.
5,000 members and constituency around 65,000 families. How do you personally, as the president of the Washington Teachers Union, lean in to listen to your members, to your families, to your students, your stakeholders? Like, what's your own personal management style for that?
Right. Well, one thing is being able to listen is critical. But I am not that far removed from a classroom. And after 44 years of teaching in 9 schools, 9 different groups of teachers, under 5 superintendents, I've learned a lot. And one of them is, if you want someone to understand or to join, embrace your agenda, you've got to be able to connect what they care about to what you care about. And if you don't know what they care about, you haven't listened. And the only way you will know is that you listen to what they care about. And if you do, you will inadvertently realize that there are dots that connect from what you care about to what, because anything in education, if it's around equity, if it's around the opportunity gap, the digital divide, the connecting, the thread that runs through all of that is equity, fairness to all students. What teacher does not want that for all students? What parent doesn't want that?
Right. There is a phrase I use when we're training folks about coalition building. Not a phrase. It's a prompt. The idea of who else cares is how I tend to phrase it myself. I like that. Put it up on the board. Who else cares? Because you can make a list. Who else cares about the kids? Who else cares about the potential outcomes? Who else cares about the fabric of our hometown? And that idea of who else cares, I think that the discipline of listening to what they say and then connecting the dots, though, is really important, because they haven't shown up, to the I'm sorry, how do I want to put this? It's on you as the leader who's making the dot connections happen to actually do the outreach. That unless you, as the visionary, do the outreach and connect the dots for them, we're going to continue to be in silos.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. And John, you really brought to mind one recent example, our teacher evaluation system, which has become highly weaponized. One of the worst evaluation systems I've ever seen or worked under in decades. One of my favorite education experts is Linda Darling-Hammond at Stanford University. She was actually called to the OECD summit, and every time we have a summit, I believe she is the US expert on education that they take to that summit. I invited her to speak at one of our shared vision conferences here. We have one a year. And she compared several teacher evaluation systems, and ours was one of them. And she basically explained why it was one of the worst. We used that. And I wanted the teachers to understand. They said, well, Liz, why can't we get it changed? So I went to the legislation, found that the legislation says the teachers union cannot negotiate the performance evaluation for teachers. So I found a council member who would agree to change to amend the legislation. And then I targeted all of the teachers that live and work in his ward to thank him for agreeing to sponsor that legislation. After that, it required the council to hold a public hearing. 8 council members out of 13 said yes, the union should have the authority to negotiate a teacher evaluation system. 1 council member was the holdup. He chairs the entire council, Phil Mendelson. And I didn't know, I learned myself, John, in the process of sort of thrashing through this. And they said, one of them said, Liz, you need to get Councilmember Mendelson to hold a public hearing. And after that, it's off and running. You already have the votes to support it. It's done. Well, guess what? It dead ended at Councilmember Mendelson's office. So I had to let 5,000 teachers know. They kept asking me, what's the holdup? Well, I thought you said we were making progress. Yes, we were. We have the support of 7 council members, but it requires a public hearing. And the person that is stopping that and has already told me that he is not going to hold it is Councilmember Bill Mendelson. Here is his email address and his phone number. And here's
that is a particular story that has some peculiarity, details to it, but it's a story I hear again and again and again. But what you did there is a really important lesson, I think, for any issue advocate, which is to not only work the backroom negotiation, but to work the public process.
There it is.
Yes. Yeah. And that public process is something that has, those kinds of meetings, the open meetings requirements, the agenda setting, the process for evaluating budgets or evaluating personnel contracts or whatever the steps are that are part of the legislative or city council, county government, school board approach. If you don't know how to work that, you're dead in the water.
Absolutely. You should teach a course on this, John.
I think we should co-teach that. I think that's what we're kind of.
You already have that. You know that.
We'll have a great time, Liz. We'll have a great time. Absolutely. Yeah, but it's a principle of organizing that people think about, especially right now when there's so much happening on the streets, is what happens in the streets, Right. But a real key principle of organizing that I think you have a real insight to is how do you organize the legislative process in order to let the system not get in your way? And I understand that you had a little bit of setback with that one member of council, but you know how to come back around to that.
Oh yeah, we are coming back. And here's what I thought about the current issues, especially this issue around policing. Mm-hmm. Some of our teachers have actually tied that to other inequities in our system, in our schools.
Right.
And that is a beauty. We have some really innovative, creative, imaginative teachers. And a few of them said, Liz, we have council members who are painting Black Lives Matter Plaza on the street and giving speeches about they're on board with Black Lives Matter, yet they are actually perpetuating inequities by allowing our school district to rid schools of school librarians. Can't we tie those issues together? Yes, we can. Yeah. Yes, we can, and we shall.
Yes.
You can't say you're about equity on one hand and not about it in another area. And of course, all of the council members agree that there is a huge disparity in how schools in DC have been resourced and funded for decades. Mm-hmm. But the question is whether or not they are willing to do anything if they have the political will to change it. And when they don't, what we have to do is show them where this is what you said you cared about. You said you cared about leveling the playing field for all students, that every ward will have quality schools with well-rounded curriculum. That's what you said you care about.
Right.
Yet,
right.
You allow the person that you have hired to run our school district to slash positions from some of the poor schools in the city. And we have to just basically put it out there. Mm-hmm. But sometimes logic doesn't work, but shame does.
That is a really important set of insights. It does. I mean, what motivates people to purchase something? If you listen to people who are into sales and marketing, there's either prestige or fear. And those are two really important motivators. Within fear, though, shame is a primary affect, and it is sometimes important to call folks out. I also know very clearly that there are times when that it's not just that sort of like back pocket passivity, but there's times when there's forces actively arrayed against, union community. There's forces actively arrayed against issue organizations. I mean, there are times when you're not just feeling like it's a hard row to hoe, or you're pushing rope up a hill, but there's actually people looking to divide us.
Yes.
And I think it's possible to organize across race class lines, but it's really hard.
It is.
And I'm wondering how you see it at work within the union a little bit, and also within your city.
And that's a very good question, John, because you're right, it is a challenge, because you do know that we have a dual school system in DC that most people don't even acknowledge. I recognized it when I ran for president and had an opportunity to visit schools west of the park, which I had never set foot in. And in walking into some of those schools, I thought I was in another country.
Is that right?
Yes. And I said, my God, I had taught in Ward 7 and 8 for 40 years by design, because on occasion I was offered a transfer to what one council member regarded a better school. You're a very good teacher. Why don't you let me help you get into a better school? Michelle re-offered me a position as a principal to basically get me to stop writing op-eds about her. But I said, no, Michelle, I really would like to be able to teach because I love teaching. I know that you may find that hard to believe, but there are some teachers who don't want to be principals. They love teaching, engaging with students, where I have the greatest impact. And she said, well, what do you want? I said, I'd like to transfer to an architecture high school. She did it by cell phone. She did a text message and I was transferred. But so, and I had a point, John, and I totally went off track.
Well, it's either about folks who are looking to divide us actively.
Thank you.
Okay.
One of the things, after I won the election, I received a phone call immediately from the Washington Post editorial board for an interview. And my campaign manager was a retired president of the Fairfax County Teachers Union. He had retired, so he was my manager. He called, he said, Liz, do not interview with them. That will be right. Oh, they hate unions. They hate unions.
Yeah.
They basically try to explode their own Writers Guild union. So he said, no, they will destroy you. She's basically going to do an interview to show the public that you are no different from the other union leaders. They're going to box you into this stereotypical, all she's about is protecting the jobs of bad teachers. And I became alarmed. I was afraid to interview with her, but I said, I feel awful not backing away from this. I just feel like I can stand my own ground. So she called, but I prepared, and she kept calling saying, are you ready? And I said, no, I have my schedule one. I need to do this story right away, Miss Davis. I really need to talk to you now. So I said, tomorrow, 2:00. She called. And several teachers who knew her, she's the editor, I think she was the editor-in-chief. They said, Liz, she loves charters, privatization, school choice, vouchers, blah, blah, and she hates unions. She will destroy you. I said, that's what she loves? He said, yeah. So I said, okay. So I did my homework on her, Credo, privatization in DC, vouchers, and then of course her opening statement was, Miss Davis, just I want to say congratulations for winning the election. I understand that you have a very bad relationship with the superintendent. I said, do you mean Kaya? She said, yes, Kaya Henderson. I said, Joanne, did you not know that Kaya Henderson are our best friends? Look.
That's great.
John,
that's great.
And Kaya and I had done work together before that.
Yep.
She had nowhere to go. She went on to charter. She went to vouchers. And I would not give her the answer she expected on any of her questions.
I'm really glad I didn't open our discussion today to asking you, when did you stop beating your dog, Like, that's I'll tell you what. So yeah. I would think that there's been an interesting opportunity for you coming in as an elected, leader, and the depth of the president's role for the union varies from local to local to local to local. The decision-making style that I would think that you brought in might have been different than your predecessors. And I'm not looking for you to talk about your predecessors, but I'm looking for you to talk about a little bit about, like, there's a lot on your plate. There's a lot of issues within that conversation around inequity. There's a lot of need on the part of your students right now. How do you keep from chasing your tail, Liz?
Because we have a lot of members. Okay. And the magic is in finding members who are interested in each of those issues. We have members who are interested in climate change. So student debt. So we organized a student debt task force, and those members were drawn to that. That took 144 teachers the very first meeting. We have teachers who are interested in social and emotional health for students, trauma-informed teaching. We basically engage with our members through very quick surveys to find out if we have one member to bring up an issue. Right now, there's a member who's concerned about an elementary school in her ward that is being built under power lines. The parents are going ballistic, no traction on it. She wants the union to basically work with the parents to stop from what's happening there, and we will. But there will be other teachers who will be interested in that issue. So basically, I don't have to chase my tail because we have teachers. It's a matter of delegating leadership to other teachers. I can't be president for life. No. We have to begin to cultivate leadership amongst our members. And the best way to do that is to get them engaged, involved on issues, initiatives, campaigns that are of interest to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they take it and run with it. They'll do the homework, they'll do the legwork,
Mm-hmm.
they'll do the outreach. It's
Mm-hmm.
a matter of letting them know that the union is interested in that issue, no matter how big or small.
And that last sentence, that the union's interested in the issue, that it's part of the whole cloth approach that you have. If this is a social justice agenda, if this is an equity agenda, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
The other question I've got is around then. So while we've known each other, it's only been a couple of months, and I've really come to enjoy working with you and alongside you on the advocacy campaigns. But I've also kept one eye on the news reports, and occasionally I'll get copied on something. And I got to tell you, one of the most amazing things that I saw anywhere in the country around trying to do one's best to grab some equity for these kids in the absence of in a truly egregious situation, was how WTU, the Washington Teachers Union, stepped up to do television-based learning when it was blatantly obvious to everybody that there were not enough internet-connected devices in any student's hands during the COVID shutdown. And the fact that you showed up on a 1950s era technology, you know,
Well, one thing
in the 21st century, I got to tell you, that was a humbling thing to watch. And I know that didn't necessarily percolate. It was a moment of like clarity for you and your leadership team.
Right.
And yet,
you're
yeah.
right. One of the and of course our teachers began expressing concern about what would happen to some of their students if we had to close before the pandemic shut us down. We transitioned to distance learning. And I was amazed at the number of teachers calling the union to ask about what's going to happen for my students who rely on school meals. I have students, Liz, who do not have computers. How are they going to engage with me? So the teachers were raising these issues. And of course, I asked all of them to very quickly survey your students before the last day they leave. Find out how many have phones, cell phones, how many have televisions, how many have computers and Wi-Fi, and they did. We used that data to determine that almost 35% of our students did not have computers, but all of them had televisions.
Yeah.
So
now, it's a different pedagogy for teaching, but what you did is you closed some part of the last mile for those kids in a desperate crisis. And I have to say, it was an amazing thing to see.
And the way our teachers stepped up, John, because I'm going to just tell you, it has not been until this year with Zoom and Microsoft Teams that I had the nerve to be on camera talking. I hate it. But our teachers, when I polled them to let them know we need pre-K lessons, math, science, social studies, they came in droves.
And I also know that you brought the school librarians to that, you know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Because John, getting those teachers to record those lessons from home required the assistance from one teacher who taught technology, television production, I believe, one of the best. He said, Liz, it's not a problem. I will send them a link. They will record. I will call them and help them set up their back. He did all of that. And guess who helped? The librarians. The librarians helped teachers use those platforms that they had never used before. And they were working on Saturdays and Sundays, John, voluntarily.
Yeah.
And most teachers acknowledge, if it had not been for our school librarian, I would not have known how to do. We've never had any reason to do distance learning. Universities have been doing it for years. But teachers transitioning from brick and mortar in 5 days to distance learning with no PD. Our librarians became the PD providers. And they did that on their spring break. Yeah.
I bring it up because I admire it. You know, I really do. I mean, but it's also a component of what it takes as a leader to have an organization that is able to pivot quickly, to turn on a dime, to be facile, but never lose its core. You know, you haven't lost the heart of what your members are doing for a living. Translates into that volunteer time. It shouldn't be volunteer time. It should be paid time. I get that. But what I'm saying is, like, the heart of your membership is what drives these successful campaigns, whether it's an advocacy campaign or a opportunity gap filler campaign like that. Yeah. So let me ask you a couple more quick questions. I want to kind of turn the corner on our time together here, and I just got two more for you about leadership, and then I want to get your advice, if I could, for other school librarians who are out there as well. But one of the key problems that we run into when we're out as an issue advocacy organization, when we're helping folks on the ground get organized, and when we're helping our constituents as school librarians, the network of parents that they've got in a campaign, talk to elected or appointed officials, is that there's a different vocabulary between progressives. They have a vocabulary that's, maybe you and I both know that innately. The conservatives' vocabulary, the libertarian vocabulary, none of them want anything bad for their kids, but sometimes they don't seem to have the compassion across other people's kids. Like, how do you, I'm not asking how you do, let me ask you this. Do you change your vocabulary as a union, as a leader, for those folks, or do you expect them to come along? Like, do you try to address your audience? I'm trying to ask as open-ended of a question as I can.
Address the audience, because to do otherwise is a waste of time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have been invited, oddly enough, to parent PTA meetings by parents. There are various education councils, is what they are in DC. Every ward has one, and they are made up of parents. There are teachers who can join, principals as well. But for some reason, I've been invited more often. The first invitation came from the Capitol Hill PTSO. Capitol Hill parents are, without a doubt, some of the most powerful parents in the city, the wealthiest as well.
Okay.
All white. If I saw one Black parent in that group, so they invited me to come to the meeting. I had no idea why. I didn't know what they expected me to say. I didn't ask. I just figured I would follow their lead once I arrived. But one thing I recognized, John, was the fact that they invited me. My office is on Capitol Hill, and I'm sure that this organization has never, as a matter of fact, I know they have never invited the teachers union president to speak at. So they were curious. But one of the reasons I'm sure they asked is because they have paid attention to some of the campaigns that we've launched on behalf of students around equity. And apparently they liked it. And so, but sitting in that audience of parents that night, the wealthiest, there on Capitol Hill, knowing that these are people who don't have problems paying their rent, or I didn't want to go with, you need to care about the poor kids. No, that was not going to work. But what I did want to do was to make them feel as if they did.
Gotcha.
I talked about parents who care about all children and how I applaud. I gave examples of parents that I've worked with, and basically sort of painted a picture of this ideal parent that I admire as a teacher, as a career educator, someone who wanted equity for all students, not just for their children. Who wouldn't want to be one of those?
That's right. That's right. I'm a decent human being. I'll show up. I'll show up. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right now we're we're recording today. It's the 2nd of September. The COVID situation in your town of Washington, D.C., in my Chicagoland area, the particulars of it, nobody's going to remember what it looked like on this particular date. But the COVID situation for education, I mean, hope right now for some people seems to be in a bit short supply. And I don't know how you're feeling. And I'm actually interested in this on a personal and professional level. Is this a hopeful time right now for education, or should we be very vigilant? Like, where are you coming from?
We need to be vigilant, but we also need to remain hopeful. And I'm always going to remain hopeful, John, no matter how bad things get. Yeah. And I've seen some really harsh times in DC. But I also know that we have teachers who have managed to survive, in my opinion, the last 10 years in this school district. I am not sure if I could have survived the last 10 years, not because I was not an effective teacher, but because I'm not a teacher that follows the script. I have never been and never will be a teacher. I basically believed on adapting my lessons to connect to the lives of my students so that students wanted to be in my classroom. I invited the community into my classroom, and that I enjoyed teaching like that. And I think the main thing was when I realized that having students who can ace a test, bubble in all of the right answers, but cannot think critically about anything they hear or read disturbed me. I wanted students to be able to apply what they learn to real world problems. Don't learn how to ace a test, get the highest score on the SAT, but you don't know how to solve a basic problem in your classroom, your school, or your community.
I'm thinking about that sixth grader you talked about at the beginning, who had the book from 1953 in her hand, Speaking Truth to Power. You know,
yes.
that is an amazing opportunity.
John, if you think that was an opportunity for her, you cannot imagine what it felt like for me. Even though I was stressed to the max, I had 24 kids in 3 cars driving into the Capitol late, jumped on the little train, had never been on it before, with 24 kids who had never seen it and running around, and had to sit down with them and have them to go over their final revisions before all that. And then we go into the Capitol, and I flopped down in the caboose with Tom Daschle, who was Speaker of the House at the time. And I was so agitated and so stressed out. I didn't see him sitting next to me because we're armed to arm. But his two aides were looking at me. They're well polished in their suits, and I'm looking like somebody had wired me into a socket. I mean, crazy. And I said, "May I help you?" They said, "Are you the teacher from Sousa?" I said, "Yes, I am." They said, "Meet Senator Daschle," and he's to my left, so I can turn. Senator, he said, "You know, I told him that you were the teacher when I saw you chasing the kids around the train."
There you go. That's great.
But John, watching that little girl standing on stage in front of an audience of looked like 500 senators and congressmen, with 24 lined up behind her, 6th grade. And do you know what her closing remark was? "And you are celebrating 50 years of Brown? Why?" That's how she closed.
No.
I have never felt so proud as a teacher.
Yes, that's extraordinary. My youngest is downstairs, my home office here, downstairs doing school from home. He's 6th grader, and I have aspirations for him, and I have hope for him in that same kind of a way. He might not have that particular opportunity, but it's teachers like you, it's school librarians like we both know, who make that sort of a thing happen. Let me ask you in our closing here, Liz, if I could, for your advice to our school librarian colleagues in particular, to our public library and academic library colleagues too, because a lot of us, I mean, of course, school librarians are members of their locals across a lot of all the public schools. Academic librarians are certainly part of their unions on campus, and there's a fair number of public libraries that are part of an SEIU and AFSCME, et cetera.
Right.
From your perspective, being of and in the union for your career in leadership now, what's your advice for them about being the change that they seek? If I can use somebody else's term, what you've been describing the whole time is essentially like, if you want to affect change, you got to be there. I mean, how can they? I mean, sometimes maybe the union isn't showing up for them. Sometimes maybe they're not organized around organizing.
Right.
What do you think?
And of course, I think one of the first things that I can do is to help, much like we did here in DC, help the librarians realize the power that they have. Not only the power they have as school librarians, but also the power of the service that they offer to students. And take a look at where our schools are falling short and see what your contributions are to lifting that up. Because that's exactly what has happened here in the district. I said, but very few people know about it. So you're going to have to be the ambassadors to let parents, policymakers, labor unions, ministers know about it. And just to get, and John, I think it's important to sort of model what it is you ask people to do as often as you can. So some of the librarians said, why would ministers care about that? I said, ministers have members in their churches who care about these issues. They're teachers. And lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, I get an invitation to be on a talk show with 4 ministers. Of course, I was a little nervous because every now and then I'll use some language that's not so present. But I just said, okay, what do you want me to just talk? We want to hear from you. What can we do to help? John, I used the school librarians as the issue.
Is that right?
And I had all of the data, which schools lost their librarians, the reading scores, when the reading scores went up as a result of the school librarians in DC. By the time we finished that interview, all of them were on board. That's going to become our issue. Tell us what we need to do next. So they're coming to a meeting of the Equity Collaborative to focus, and they will be working with Casey Boyd, who will chair the subcommittee on school librarians. And basically, we want that subcommittee to lead the campaign, not only to get a school library in every school, but the digital divide campaign, because when you think of school library media specialists, you're talking technology. The students in most of those schools in Ward 7 and 8, John, would not have access to technology or books, whether they are on shelf or online, without a library media specialist. So basically, by taking those out of our schools, we are basically taking away valuable resources to some of our most vulnerable students. And we have to launch it as that. But getting our library media specialists to know how to advocate, because they have everything they need to be powerful advocates. So I think the best thing is, the best advice is, when you think about it, my experience, my first experience, because I was not born in DC. I went to school in the South until 3rd grade. But I attended elementary and junior high here. And my very first love of the school library was in the 7th grade, where Mrs. Jackson invited all of her students to write an essay. And she said, and you cannot just write it from your head. You're going to have to research the topics. She was one of the best language arts teachers I've ever had. She said, go to the library on your lunch break and after school and in the morning. I was in the library. When she told us the prize was $500, I didn't need to hear anymore.
$500. That's a good incentive to get yourself in the library.
Yeah, that was like I was suddenly, $500 is all I could get. I was in the library morning, lunch, and after school. Research and topic. I won 1st place. And I have lived from that point. It actually created a love of for writing for me. But being able to go into the quiet space of the library during the lunch break, it meant so much. And to not have had a library, and that continued throughout high school and university, having a quiet space, access to any book you wanted, and assistance in finding whatever information you needed. You cannot put a price tag on that.
Right. No, Liz, I think that your personal insights into this, your personal experience, are driving some of that awareness, and I truly appreciate it. I also admire what you're saying about how the school librarians, my library colleagues, need to embrace their own power is the first place to start, though. Absolutely. And their power comes from the authenticity of the work that they're doing and the engagement that they have legitimately with the kids or the constituents or the community. I really appreciate today with you. This has been a real pleasure to be able to have this conversation.
Likewise. And John, I want you to know that one other thing that we ought to consider, if we haven't, is for library media specialists to collaborate across borders. I mean, we are in different cities and school jurisdictions, but we have the same problems. And we need to talk to each other, about the campaigns, about the work that we do, what was successful, what didn't work, how to build allies. And who are the most important allies to have. I think that's something worth exchanging.
I think it would be really fascinating to take a page out of the broader union community and really look at the table, on this, and making sure that school librarians have their own table in order before we, start doing additional table work. But I'm with you, and I'd like you to help, share that as we develop.
I'd love to.
All right, Liz, thank you so much. Ladies and
Thank you,
folks,
John.
This has been a wonderful chat. Again, Elizabeth Davis, President of the Washington, D.C. Teachers Union. I'd invite you to take a look at what they're up to. Liz, thanks again today.
Thank you, John, and stay safe out there.
You too there. Cheers. Bye-bye.